Hey, I'm David Luba. I'm the co-founder and head of partnerships here at veritree.
And I'm Steven, one of the co-founders and head of innovation at veritree.
April 2024, we visited our mangrove estuaries in Kenya. We went to check out the planting projects, see how it positively impacted the communities, and also we rolled out some new technology that's going to help us verify restoration efforts and measure the outcomes that are happening of the work that we're doing.
So to start off, I think it would be helpful to talk about what mangroves actually are. Mangroves are species that grow along the channels in the coastal regions in Eastern Africa. In this particular region, it's in Kenya, in the Mombasa region. And mangroves are key because they hold together the soil with their massive root systems, and the majority of their biomass is actually in those root systems underground. So they're amazing trees. They create this concrete wall basically that holds the forest together. It brings back a ton of fish and other wildlife in those channels, and they're just an incredible species. And they're one of the trees that store the most amount of carbon not only in their above ground biomass, but in their root systems and the soil that they hold together.
So after traveling from Canada to Kenya, we got to the mangrove site and we started chugging through this mud. And there's a lot of mud. So as you're walking through the mud here, you're sinking in, and there was more mud and there was more mud. Here's like an example of kind of what the estuaries look like. And as you're going through there, you can see the crabs and you can see fish coming on along the shoreline. And we kept chugging through more mud and even more mud. So much mud, I fell in and did a mud angel. But eventually we got to solid ground. And this was kind of nice because your hip flexors definitely get sore chugging through the mud. And we were looking around this area here, and I was thinking, wow, it feels good to stand on this ground. Now, this area all used to be a mangrove estuary. This was so dense. This area in Kenya is known as Kuchi, which means darkness in the local language. And it was so dense, and these trees were cut down for charcoal. So the area never used to be federally protected. The mangroves were cut down, and even the terrestrial trees surrounding the area were also cut down for charcoal. So over time, sand blew into this area and the dirt settled with kind of, you can see some of the root systems here that Stephen was talking about. Now, the soil is very dry, it's very infertile. The salinity levels aren't very, very strong, they're very low. And if we were to go here and put mangrove propagules, mangrove seeds into the area, we would have an extremely low survivability rate. So one thing that's extremely important to understand is not all restoration is done equally. It's really important to ensure that you look at the landscape and you set that area up for success. So Stephen's going to talk a little bit about kind of our strategy and how we look at that.
Yeah, so one of the key things when it comes to setting up a good restoration project is being able to plan, right? So our system creates what we call a smart design. So the veritree smart design takes that polygon region of that area that is going to be restored, and it performs an analysis on it. And this indicates and sort of dictates everything that happens on the ground, how all the tasks are created, and where we tackle first. So the first thing is we have that polygon, and it creates an overlay, a hex grid overlay. From that point, we use geospatial to look at the canopy height of the existing trees and forests in that area. Then we also take another layer, which is the NDVI, which is a vegetation health index. We merge those two layers together, and then we sort of simplify or reclassify those two layers. And out of that, we eventually get, after overlaying that hex grid back on top, we now get a 3-part intervention level hex grid. And this is how we determine where we're going to start planting, where the crews on the ground are going to do their monitoring efforts over time, everything. So as you can see here, 3 different intervention levels based on the existing canopy height and density of the forests that still remain. And then we can go in and understand how many trees go into the low, medium, and high intervention and when. So the first stage is phase 1 in the first 2 years. We can look at we can schedule the teams to go out to these areas, verify that this geospatial information is correct, and begin planting. Then phase 2 and phase 3 until that whole area is finally restored. This is the monitoring plan that gets done after the restoration plan. So as you can see here in the light purple X's are where dendrometers go. So this is where we're measuring the biomass accumulation of the trees throughout the different seasons of extended periods of drought and flooding. And the dark purple hexes are the reference sites. So you can see they're often automatically put in areas of low intervention because there's existing forest there. And then lastly, the orange hexes are for bioacoustic monitors. So we can constantly monitor the wildlife and the birds that are coming through that area to understand the health of the forest. When we take all of that away, we also need to understand how are we actually going to restore the areas that require high intervention. The areas that David just spoke about, the deserted areas. You can't just go in there and put propagules in the ground because they'll just get roasted by the sun and they'll die right away. So you have to slowly work your way out from the low intervention levels, and then the forest can gradually make their way out. But also another key point of that is the soil is not in the proper condition. It doesn't have the proper salinity levels. So we need to create an irrigation plan, a hydrology plan. So what this shows is the areas where potential irrigation channels need to be dug to move those trees out. If we zoom in to one of those areas right around here, we can see an area where if we remove the irrigation plan, we can see that trenches have already been dug. I believe that this is around 15 kilometers of trenching that has been dug here where we can now restore adequately. So I just wanted to show that because I think this is a key part that gets overlooked when you're doing restoration. And if you don't address these things, if you don't plan it out ahead of time, then you're sort of just walking through the forest blind and you don't really know how you're going to be able to move forward. So once you're in those areas, we're using a number of different technologies. We're using salinity monitoring with these refractometers to say, okay, is the soil of the right quality that we can actually start planting here? We're looking at the areas where the trenches need to be dug. How are these trenches being dug in an organic way that connects to the main channels? We don't want to change something that was never there. We want to look at the historical hydrology and mimic that and bring it back to what it was. You can see an overview from the drone of some of where the channels have been dug. Just an overview here as well. And then here's the success of what happens. This would never be possible. Planting propagules in this area, in this deserted area, would never grow without this carefully planned hydrology.
So after we toured around the irrigation channels and kind of saw the different areas of the planting project, we ended up at the nursery. And the locals welcomed us with a song and a dance. They were so happy to see us and kind of thank us and all of our corporate partners for the impact that we're making. And if you jump to the next slide here, Stephen, we saw these trees. And the purpose of the nursery here is to really give these trees a head start. So these propagules, they fall off of the mangroves. They're collected and look like little sticks. And they're put into these bags. They're put into the soil in the region here and they're watered. They've got extra shelter from the surrounding mangroves, and they're taken care of so they can get a head start. And once they're kind of a little bit more mature, they're then taken out and planted in the areas that have already been prepped. So we had a good chance to talk to a lot of the locals. We've got Victor here on the left. He's a little bit muddy because he challenged me to a race through the mangroves, and I won. But Victor was telling us some stories here about the team. And this young lady here, she was actually caught red-handed cutting down the trees. So Victor and a few other people from the EarthLungs leadership team were out planting, and they noticed some activity was going on. The trees were kind of moving around and something was happening, and they quickly found out that she was there cutting down the trees for charcoal. Now, this is a federally protected area, and EarthLungs is doing a lot of good work here. Part of that work includes kind of educating people in the region about the importance of the forest. EarthLungs has over 2,000 people on monthly salaries. 600 are full-time. The rest are part-time. EarthLungs is also helping with social insurance, so everyone gets health care, as well as EarthLungs Cares has a matching program for retirement. So it was really cool hearing from EarthLungs what the socioeconomic impact is having. But this young lady was caught red-handed, and she was doing this because she didn't have any other form of income. She cut the trees down. She'd then take that to make charcoal and sell that. Now, EarthLungs, after chasing her for 6 hours through the mangroves and catching her, they had a decision to make. Do we take her to the KFS, the Canadian Forestry Service, and turn her in? And she was kind of explaining to them why she was doing it, and she was scared. But instead, EarthLungs brought her under their wing, and they gave her a job at the nursery. They started educating her on the benefits of trees, how the trees are helping the local fishing community, how the trees and caring for the trees are helping bees kind of prosper in the area, and they taught her this. So she now works full-time with EarthLungs. She's friends with everyone in the nursery. She's helping get those trees, giving them that head start. But she's also working with EarthLungs to also identify areas that are illegally getting cut down. And she's now working to help inform how EarthLungs can better protect the forest and work collaboratively with the KFS. So I think this is a great story about how EarthLungs takes care of their community, they take care of their people, but they also ensure that they can give people a hand up when possible. So after visiting the nursery and seeing all the amazing work there, we left. There was an awesome goodbye song, an amazing Asante Sana, which means thank you in Swahili. And we left to go tour around the mangrove estuaries a bit more.
So to switch gears a little bit, after the planting is done in a certain area, we have our survivability check protocol, and typically what that looks like in mangrove specifically is after 3 months, the team will go in and do a quick temporary plot in the area, which is checking how many of the trees are alive, how many are dead, how many are dormant. At that 3 month stage, they still could be just not quite sprouted yet and ready to go. So there's a little bit of a difference there. But that's a quick check, a quick spot check, and you can see that some of these trees are flagged, so they know if they've been checked or not. So they can either use those flags or they can mark in the mud. But we're trying to make this process a lot easier and use technology where applicable to scale this effort, so we don't have to spend hours counting all these trees, understanding if we counted the same one twice, marking this down on paper. As we want to move past that and do it in a different way. So I'll touch on that again in a moment. But as you can see here along these channels, we're planting at a high density, and the reason for that is the trees have a much higher chance of success being planted in a density that is how they would be naturally. Now it's kind of hard to believe when you see this that they would be that dense, but a full healthy mangrove forest, you can barely even fit your body between two of the trunks of these trees. That's how tight these trees are. So we're looking at anywhere from 10 to 15 to 18,000 trees per hectare planted in here, and that's what a healthy forest is going to look like. So you can see David here standing amongst them, and it's packed. So these are going to grow up to be a very healthy forest from what you can see here. So very exciting stuff. Those trees were roughly 2 years old, a year and a half, 2 years old. So what I just mentioned before about doing some of those quick checks at that 3 month stage also is applicable for 6 months, 12 months. But one thing we're doing is everyone has phones out in the field. So we're getting them to create these 3D mappings of all the planting sessions that they do. Now, when I say all the planting sessions that they do, it's not quite rolled out to all of them, but we're working towards that step by step. And what we're doing is when we create these models, I'll show you one here in a quick second. You're able to actually, let's reload this. we can actually reconstruct what that planting session looks like and share it with you all in your impact dashboard for your planting sessions. And I can actually move this around. And so our system can actually, we're working with our system to be doing object detection on these trees. So we can double check what the numbers are. You can see some are alive here, some are dead over here. And we can actually move around this area in 3D space, which is incredible because this not only cuts down the time that it takes for them to do one of these spot checks, but it also allows us to get a lot more accuracy with those spot checks in the future. So this is just one way that we're using technology to make the operations on the ground a lot more efficient, but also provide a better experience and verification and trust with the work the amazing work that's being done by the crews on the ground. So I just wanted to share that. And then some more of the technology out in the field. There a lot of those dendrometers and acoustics that I showed you in the first monitoring plan. They all usually communicate with long range signals, and it's sometimes tough to leave the receivers of those signals that collect those log data. We can't really leave those out in the field. So what happens is a monitoring expert, not this guy, he's on our team, but one of the EarthLungs teams will go out there, and they'll go out there with an antenna and a gateway, and it'll sync all of the data from the past couple of months that's been logged roughly every 5 minutes. So we don't miss out on the data. We just get it in a little bit of a time delay, but this is a solid way to slowly introduce massive area connections of dendrometer data, so we can improve our system over time and the accuracy. So pretty exciting stuff.
So after touring around the mangroves and learning about the trenches, like the irrigation setup, learning about the nursery, where 40% of our mangroves in Kenya are starting nursery, we did a third thing to make sure that these trees are successful and they remain there longer term. So what we're doing is we're deploying beehives. We're launching a beehive roughly every 5 kilometers. So these beehives help provide income for forest scouts. So forest scouts patrol the fields. The beehives are all logged in the veritree system, so we know where they are, when to get the goods, the honey, the beeswax from them. But most importantly, it allows us to have that presence in the forest with forest scouts. It allows us to ensure that there's a protection element and a pollination element too. These bees are helping cross-pollinate between like healthier trees and up and coming trees. The beehives are providing that income. And who wants to run into a beehive if you're legally cutting down the trees, right? So it's pretty amazing that EarthLungs and veritree with our system and our intelligence are able to do the nurseries, the trenches, the beehives, and this is all because we're focused on the outcomes. We're not just there putting trees in the ground because it'd be easy to put mangroves in those sand flats. We're here to grow forests and ensure we're growing long-term forests. And it was pretty apparent that these trees are having an incredible impact on our planet. And we were seeing locals fishing, getting some prawns. Look at how good those look. I want to go and jump into my screen right now and take a bite of that. But there was a lot of fishing going on. There were birds zipping in and out of the mangroves. So these forests are also giving people their livelihoods back, which is really cool, and giving them food and giving the animals an area to hang out. And then another thing that was huge is the trickle-down effect. So we were talking to a lot of the locals in the communities around the reforestation projects, as well as the local government, the Kenyan Forestry Service, which is helping us set these projects up, protect them longer term. But what's really cool is seeing all of like the other little businesses, the coffee shops, the people creating food for the tree planters and cooking that. And before we started the projects, the villages were full of kids. The kids were horsing around with the donkeys and the goats and chickens and everything running around the village. And now the kids aren't there anymore. And one of the most rewarding things Victor was telling me, the head of EarthLungs, is seeing this because it means that the parents can now afford to send the kids to school. The kids can now get a school uniform. They can have solar lights to study at night, where before there was no income, so they weren't able to go and get an education. So the impact that we're making here through restoration efforts is going far beyond taking carbon out of the air and creating biodiversity. It's also generating education and these opportunities for that next generation, which was really cool. So we left Kenya feeling pretty inspired, and seeing a project as well run from the local community, from the top down and bottom up, was incredible. All right. Well, thank you so much for the time, and excited to plant more trees together. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.